close to that. We'll just get started. All right. We're going to get going here. Again, welcome to the College Parent Expectations for 2024. Survey results from 20,487 families. I'm really excited about this because this is some of the data that we've been working on the longest, and I'll introduce our panelists here in a moment. I'm sure you've been on many of these types of presentations. The lines are on mute, so if you are just ecstatic about the data that you are seeing and start screaming or crying or some sort of emotion in between, we will not hear you. It's completely fine. The lines are on mute. We've got that for your safety and for our safety as well. We'll also send you the recording of this presentation and the slide deck and the report as well. So sit back, relax, again, get that cup of coffee going, and no big note-taking needs here, obviously. And if you've never heard of Campus ESP, well, I'd be very surprised because you were registered on the Campus ESP website. But Campus ESP, we work with parent family engagement for colleges and universities. We're at about 400 colleges, actually over 400 colleges, and 9 million families. And the report that you're seeing today is actually co-sponsored with our great partners, Ruffalo Noel Levitz, RNL, the best consulting company that has three letters in their name, I will say. And again, Campus ESP, if you've never heard of us, we have a portal, a platform really that helps with all your parent communication needs. We wrap it with experts to help with your success. And then, of course, analytics to show that it's working. And if you need more information on what we do, how we do it, then you can just, of course, go to the website where you registered anyway. And you can click on, I like going to the blogs and resources page because you'll see a whole bunch of case studies and webinars and other resources. Even if you're not using Campus ESP, it'll give you ideas of where to go, what to do, how to engage with parents, and how to make sure it's tied back to things like student success. Okay, so let's jump into it. First, intros. Again, my name is Dave Becker. I am the CEO and co-founder of Campus ESP. My kids, my twins, just graduated yesterday. And so that's a little bit jarring. So if I just start crying in the middle of this call, that's where it's coming from. I was saying to Jen and Raquel, I feel very untethered right now, but I know I'll get through it. And we're going to start that journey with this presentation. And I'm going to have one of my favorite colleagues, Dr. Raquel Bermejo. She has also one of the longest titles I've ever had to read before, Associate Vice President for Market Research and Planning for Enrollment Management at Ruffalo Noel Levitz. And Raquel, you've been working on this with me you've been working on this parent engagement for 10 years, and I think about 6 years with me. So thank you for joining the program today.
Thank you very much.
And we also have Dr. Jennifer Plumley, and she is the Vice President for Access and Student Success at Marian University. And she's also been working on family engagement and how it relates to student success. Jen, you were saying before that this is actually part of, I'm sorry, remind me again, because I don't want to misspeak, but this is your, go ahead.
This is my area of research. Yeah, understanding how family engagement impacts student success. So I'm excited to be here today.
All right. Thank you. Thank you both. We're going to jump right into the data. I'm going to make sure I can navigate here. And so the first thing is just talking a little bit about who we did survey with this research. It's across 46 institutions. You can take a look on the screen and start looking at the diversity of those institutions. A large number of them were public institutions. But you can see there's a pretty good range of family incomes here and also different sizes as well. One thing to note with this research is these were all Campus ESP schools, which just has to add some bias here. And we'll talk more about that as we get into some of the results. All 46 of these schools are using Campus ESP. Raquel, you've done this a lot, obviously. The two of us have done this a lot. Any big demographic differences this year compared to previous years, especially as we look back and compare some of the results year to year?
I think possibly the size of the institution. I think we had more responses from smaller institutions than in the past. So I think that added definitely a layer of diversity to the responses that possibly we didn't have in the years prior. and also the representation of parents in the last 2 years of college. So you see there on the right of the screen, we have the students' expected graduation year. Parents or families with the students in the first and second year of their college experience seem to respond to the survey at a higher rate. But I think this year I was actually very pleased with the fact that 35% of the families had students in the last 2 years of college. Some of them, 15% of them, were actually students, families of students that were about to graduate. And I think that diversity of age for the students and the years they've been in college is important for this study. So
Yeah, super helpful. And also for those of you who have been on these research summaries before, we do 2 studies. One is for families of current students, which is what you're listening to and watching right now. And the other one is families of prospective students, which Raquel is actually going through the data as we speak. And we have a little bit of a preview on that. So Raquel, thank you for all your help there.
You're very welcome. This study took place in the fall, the one we're going to be talking about today, and the prospective families took place a month ago.
Okay. And by the way, Raquel does all this, does not charge schools. So thank you for all the research, because that was one of the things when we first got into parent engagement at Campus ESP, we were really shocked that there's just not a lot of data out there. So this adds to not only the narrative that you always hear about there about parents, but like what's really happening. So with that, let's jump into it. I bundled everything up into 4 takeaways. Obviously, you'll get the research if you haven't already downloaded it, but I wanted to try to simplify it into four different areas. And one of them is that, number one, most families still want to hear from you weekly. People who have been on this webinar before know that this is something that comes up every single year, is that most families want to hear from their students' institution weekly. Before we get into that element, let's just start with how often students are communicating with their families. So this is student to family communication. And when you look at it, it comes down to about 50% communicate, 50% of students communicate with their families daily, or at least once a day, or several times a day. So I think number one, just understanding how deep that connection is between student and family sometimes is surprising for folks. I'm certainly finding it surprising as my students move on to their college experiences here. And then you're going to see this in a couple areas here, but we're breaking things down by ethnicity, by income levels, and by status. And this creates a big part of the narrative that you'll see later on, which is, first off, by ethnicity. Black families, Hispanic, Latinx families, they engage with their students, with their kids at a higher level. You can see these numbers here compared: 32% several times a day for Black families, Hispanic families, 29%. You can see it compared to some of the other ethnicities and races here. And so this is a big thing that not everybody really knows about, which is these families really have very close connections to their students. The other thing that we see quite frequently is that families by income level engage at higher levels. And look at this, you're just seeing this several times a day for families less than 30K, 38% there. And that's just kind of like head shaking. It's pretty amazing. And then also down here at the bottom, you'll see that their most engaged families with their students are first generation families. So let's pause here for a moment. Raquel, we see this every single year when it comes to this family student involvement. I mean, number one, do you think it's still surprising to people? And are there other trends that you think are surprising if people knew about the connection between how often families connect with their college students?
Gosh, it shouldn't be surprising, but it is still surprising to folks. And luckily for us, for all of us that are working with this data, we can understand, we can make the connection between this frequent communication and how the families are supporting their students, which goes directly in Jen's area, which is student success, and they're completely interrelated. So if we're still ignoring the families' portion in supporting their student to succeed, stay, and eventually graduate, I think we are just sort of putting ourselves blinders and thinking only the student and their experience in the institution are part of their success, because as Jen can speak more in depth, families are just key to how these students stay in college, engaged, and succeed.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an opportunity, and this is kind of just a way to kind of set the level of engagement that's out there. Jen, do you notice a difference with students that are coming to campus at Marian compared to previous years? Do you notice any trends that are happening here related to some of this data?
Yeah, I think we are seeing the exact same trends. So an increase in first generation college students. We're seeing an increase in Pell eligible students, and definitely with our Latino students. And as you asked that question, we know that they're in contact with their student. Our families are sometimes multiple times a day, once or twice a day. It does create new opportunities for us as institutions to determine how are we going to interact with families? How do we need to maybe adapt or evolve our current communication strand to make sure that we are meeting those expectations? On our campus for our Latino students, we're now translating parts of our newsletter into Spanish so it's accessible to all. So being able to look at the data and evolve has been really important for us.
That's super helpful. And that Spanish language translation, I feel like, is more and more becoming the norm. I feel like a couple of years ago, it was those schools that are maybe just HSIs, just emerging HSIs, but now it's more and more kind of becoming the norm. Okay, so we know that family student communication is high, and then we look back to parent expectations of you at institutions, at colleges, at universities, and what they expect from you. And we do this every year. We say, okay, what percentage of families expect communication from their students' institution at least weekly? And we always have this big number that hits here that is surprising. And for 2024, we have that number. You can kind of see for current families, it went down from 85% last year, expect communication at least weekly, to 70% this year. And sneak peek, because Raquel is just working on these numbers, we saw a similar trend with prospective families. This has not been released yet, but it went from 88% expect communication at least weekly down to 81%. So we're definitely, so the good news is, and I guess in some ways, is we are seeing a decrease in the expectations from college for colleges and universities to communicate, but it's still at a very high level. 70% expect communication from you at least weekly. It's interesting when we go back to those same stats by ethnicity, by income, by status. If you look at these numbers about who expects the most communication from you by income level of the family or by status, it's pretty similar. It's pretty similar. So all these families kind of expect this weekly communication, or at least 70% do, which is a very high percentage. And so this was a really not really surprising thing for me, but because last year those expectation levels, 88%, 85% for weekly communication, just seems so extraordinarily high. So Jen, let me pose this question to you. Are we through the COVID years of family involvement, and is this a good thing?
So I do think we're through that COVID involvement piece, but I still think 70% is extremely high. Keeping it up at 85%, that 88%, that's almost unreasonable for those of us that are in this area of work, right? So I do think it's starting to evolve. We see parents and families pulling back just a little bit, but what I'm really seeing is the content that they want is no longer more about health and safety on campus. It's about student success. And so these are students that were very much impacted by the COVID years in high school and what they were learning. And so now they want to know, does my student have the tools to be successful? What are the tools available? What are the resources on your campus? That's the information that they want and that we need to be trying to supply.
That's super helpful. We definitely see that at Campus ESP. Raquel, same question for you. Are we through the COVID years? I feel like it's like a TV show or something like that. And is this a good thing?
I think so. I think, like Jen said, this is more reasonable and more attainable. We can definitely meet those expectations. I think I was mentioning to you when we met a few days ago, I have a friend whose a high school principal, and when I mentioned this decrease in the expectation for weekly communication, he said they had experienced the same at their level. And he thought it was a good thing too. He thought it was going to be more of communication on demand kind of paradigm that we are moving into, rather than, you know, I need to know all of these things that my students need to basically get through the school year because they're studying from home, which is where we were coming from in the last 2 years. So yeah, this is definitely, I think we're going back to, I mean, this is still really high. 81 and 70% are just, you know, 8 and 7 out of every 10 parents, but I think we are seeing more realistic expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I think for most schools, this is still really difficult to keep up with their expectations. So, but it's good to see these trends like kind of normalize a little bit more.
Yeah.
So that's the first takeaway from the research, which is most families still want to hear from you weekly. Another thing, and this has been coming up for the last couple of years as well, is email remains the preferred channel. Like if you're looking to start your parent or family communication strategy, I would always start with email because it's just lowest cost. But text messaging is an emerging communication gap. And so one of the charts in the research that we just released is the channels that families prefer for communication, the top 2 preferences versus channels used by the institution. So what you're seeing here is preferred by families is in this kind of like yellowish gold, and then used by the institutions is in this blue. And this is kind of one of the interesting things I found here is that not all schools know what, or not all parents know what they're using. Remember, I said all of these schools are campus ESP schools. They all have a parent portal, but you can see only 39% of them use or realize they were using the parent portal. So we'll talk more about this in a moment. A lot of them are really using email as the main communication. And some of the, if you're a campus ESP user or administrator, they're using the newsletters that are coming from there. And it's one of the reasons why we're actually going to enhance the newsletters a bit over the next couple months. But one thing that's really interesting to point out here is preferred by families, text messaging, 42%, only 18% of institutions are using it. So drilling into that a little bit more, you'll see that when we look at preferred communication channels by income, you'll notice that for lower income families, there is less of a preference for email, and there's more of a preference for text messaging. And just generally, you're going to see a higher preference for text messaging. And Raquel, again, you and I have seen this over the years. It's not really that surprising. I think it's like where technology maybe is a little bit more of a barrier. Text messaging kind of evens the playing field. So we see this quite a bit. And then also when you look at text messaging preferences by race, ethnicity, and by status, you'll also notice, kind of looking at this second column over here, the highest preference for text messages are by Black families, Hispanic, Latinx families as well. So that's always something interesting for, especially if you're an HBCU or an HSI. And then similarly, first generation, look at this. Text messaging preference 47% for families of first generation students, while as continuing generation, about 41%. So we're seeing some of those same dynamics that we saw with the earlier research, the earlier points that we made come through here. If you're looking to reach these families, text messaging might be a more and more important part of your strategy. And although this isn't part of the research report, when we look at campus ESP data, we have close to 9 million parents and interactions for all 9 million parents in the portal. We can see that the SMS opt-in, parents that opt into text messaging at HBCUs are nearly 3 times higher than our institutional average. So just in case you weren't so sure about whether or not to focus on text messaging for some of these segments, we know that those families are really eager to have text messaging as an option for them. Okay, so let's take a step back here. Let's go back to this chart, which looks at family preferences for different communication channels. And Jen, let's again start off with you. When you're thinking about how to engage with families, is there a quote unquote best way to engage with families, or how do you look at reaching the most families to make the most impact?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is we've got to meet families where they are. And so for us, email is definitely our number one avenue that we are using to communicate with families. But I'm thinking about Family Weekend coming up, and we want to communicate that in many different ways because a family member might read that in an email and save the date, but then not forget about it. They might not remember until they get a direct mail, a postcard saying Family Weekend's here, save the date, register now. Maybe they need it in a text message. So our approach has been, let's get the information out there. Let's realize that family members consume this content in multiple different ways. And when we need them to take action, we will need to make sure that we're meeting them exactly where they are. But I will say email is probably our number one form of communication right now in general.
Yeah, that's great. That's super, super helpful. And I completely agree with that. Meeting them where they are. And this text messaging, 42%. I think that I almost positive, Raquel, that is the highest we've seen. It keeps getting higher and higher. I think there's a generational thing going on there. I'm kind of like email generation, and I think we're moving more toward parents of texting generation. Are there other trends that you're seeing, Raquel, year over year, based off of just the 10 years of research that you've been doing here?
I think we're seeing a growth in the preference for the family portal. On this research and on the perspective side too, still with that gap every year between first generation and continuing generation, divided on the incomes too, and also the telephone. I think, like Jen said, it's about meeting the families where they are. And when we're talking about lower income families and first generation families, these adults are most likely not sitting in front of the computer the whole day like all three of us are. So expecting them to keep up with email maybe is not something they do on a daily basis. So maybe texting or a phone call for some cases is the best way to reach them because that's exactly where they are. So I think it's sort of understanding what their needs are and also offering options to opt in to different channels and understanding that some families communicate and receive communication better in a certain way.
I was going to ask you, it's not in here, but typically we have social Facebook in here as well. And it's generally pretty low. Did we look at that research for this year?
So we took it out of here and we took it out of the communication because we actually have a whole entire mini section on what social media platforms are families using to follow universities. But we took it out of here because social media is not necessarily a way for families to communicate with the institutions. It was more about them following institutions and seeing news about it. And it was sort of like I was getting mixed signals with this data. So we have another section about that.
I think generally though, we've seen it pretty low. Again, I have twins that just graduated high school and I've been invited to all these Facebook groups and it is, I feel like I have to get like a brown paper bag just to like calm my breathing when I'm in these groups. It's a lot of engagement and I think it's very intimidating to a lot of parents and families. So while that might be part of your strategy, it's probably not good to make it be the only part of the strategy. And I think generally for families of current students, most schools are trying to get away from Facebook because it's also a lot to manage. Okay, let's talk a little bit about what families want. Families want more information about student support services. And this was kind of interesting. So when we go into the data, this top part here is importance of information shared with families by institutions. And this information is important. These are all the things that we think are important or that families are saying are important, and families know where to find it. So things like costs and tuition, account services, academic calendar, campus safety. These are all the things that are important to families and that they know where to find it. And then we bundled together some of the things that are also important, but families don't know where to find it. And actually, the top two here, the first two, student job placement and career services, this is kind of interesting because I've anecdotally seen this come up more and more with schools. But the one that I wanted to drill into here a little bit more is mental health support resources and financial aid and scholarships. And these tie into two themes that come up again and again for a lot of families, which we're going to talk about. But before we do, another drill down here is just with families of first generation students, they're generally around 20% less likely to know where to find critical information. And this is always interesting, especially I think, Raquel, this is something we talk about all the time, which is financial aid and scholarships, which can, be such a barrier for student success and student enrollment. And you can just see families of first generation students are able to find the information independently only 35% of the time compared to over half for their continuing education family peers. So Raquel, when you see this stuff, and I know I already can see it in your eyes. You get that slow blink going on, and you're like, "What's going on here?" And maybe more importantly, how do you think schools can help?
My goodness, you know me very well. Yeah, this always makes me really sad. This is truly where I see the lack of equity in the access to information. And information for the parents, I think, equals support they can give their students to succeed and to stay in a school in a lot of cases. So I don't think it's a coincidence that we see these same pattern every year, both on the current student and on the prospective student. First generation families and lower income families have a really hard time finding information. And I know most institutions do a great job of putting information out there, but is it easy to find? Do they have to click 7 times to get to a place where it explains how to, do they have to renew their scholarships every year? How do they set up payment plans? What are the true costs? What if they decide to live at home? So one layer is how easy it is to find information, and the other layer is, are we talking to normal people? Are we expecting these parents who most likely don't have a college experience? Some of them don't speak English as a first language. A lot of them actually could have been in the United States only for 2-3 years. Are we expecting them to speak this higher ed lingo that only us speak? Are we explaining things, and by we I mean the institutions, are we explaining things in a way that they can actually understand them? And are we offering to help them understand this information? I think that's key. Do they know where to go to understand how to set up a payment plan? Which for the 3 of us, it's probably just easy to understand, but we know based on this data, for a lot of people, it's not.
Yeah, it's definitely I mean, again, going through it right now, it's emotional. Every time you get something, you don't want to mess it up. I also think this is interesting for the campus ESP customers out there. Almost every single portal tracks parents by first generation student status. And I think we all look at the data and we're like, oh, that's so interesting. But as far as creating content specific to their families, I feel like campus ESP and many schools out there, we can all do a better job of trying to push past some of or provide extra content to these families that maybe need a little bit more, like, this is higher ed 101. This is what to expect, the things that we just maybe take for granted. Having said that, there is a lot of investment, especially for the schools that are even on this call, listening, taking an hour out of their day, 45 minutes out of their day to go through this data. So there's a lot of investment being made out there, and a lot more than when we started Campus ESP 7-ish years ago that schools are making. So This next chart looks at, again, from the parent's perspective, whether there's a resource that's available, which is in kind of this yellow gold, whether it's not available in this purple, and whether they don't know in blue. Website for current families, a little over half, about 60% actually, say that this is available. I think most schools do have a website for parents. I think this is pretty fairly represented from what I see there, around 60%. Parent and Family Programs Office, only 40%. This is also what we pretty much see. Everybody kind of feels like, especially if you're a campus ESP customer, maybe you have a parent family program office, but most schools still do not. Again, these are all campus ESP customers, so only about 2/3 of them realize they do have access to a portal, but most of them are using the newsletter. And so this is where that whole email focus comes into play. And then we surveyed these parents, and 91% of families who read the parent and family newsletter find it helpful. And I think this is great for campus ESP because they're getting the newsletter from campus ESP. But I think it just goes to show you again, that email is the easiest starting point for you because you can really make an impact there. And then drilling a level lower here in the detail, satisfaction with information received from the institution. At the top here, I have two of the highest satisfaction levels, communication in general and campus safety. And then I have the 4 lowest down here, satisfaction levels from parents. And in the report, there's more detail here, but this is just kind of surfacing it for this presentation. But again, you can see satisfaction with information received from the institution, lowest for financial aid or scholarship calculator, and lowest for mental health resources. So drilling into those, let's bring Jen back into the conversation here. I always find it really interesting when you're looking at content, it's things like mental health and financial aid. Maybe you're prepared to create that content or deliver it, but most schools have somebody else who is the expert. So how do you get those departments involved in creating the content and maybe understanding the value of parent and family engagement?
And I think that's a tricky question too, because I'm guessing people on the call today, they might be from the Office of Admissions, they could be from the Office of Advancement or Student Affairs, Student Success. The one thing that I feel like I've really appreciated as I've been going through this process is relationships that I have with my colleagues on campus. I try to make it as easy as possible for them to develop content and to share content. So I'm known just like to create forms, ask some leading questions for them, and have them complete it so it doesn't feel like they have to start from scratch. I also really like to utilize our student employees as well. We have RAs on campus, and so I reached out to them in the spring and was like, hey, would you clean your room for me? And then would you take a video so we can see what a first-year residence hall room looks like when it's fully decorated? And then we can share it with our incoming families. So I think finding connections and finding opportunities is very important, and make it as easy as possible for those partners. Have them fill in the blank.
I hate to even use the term double click, but can you double click into one of those areas, which is first year families? I always pick up on this, which is like, that is such an opportunity to set what the appropriate level of parent and family engagement should be. And because they're most emotional at that point and they're worried and they're not sure necessarily in a lot of cases what is expected of them. And of course they want their students to succeed, but they don't want to smother them, even though it might not always seem like that. So is there positioning or people that you involve for first year families specifically to really help set the stage?
Yeah, so our Office of Orientation is a key player, and then our senior leaders are definitely key leaders. Those that have had students already go through the college process, that we can say, hey, if you have an emergency or if you're worried about your student, give us a call. If you're calling every week, we're going to start to be a little worried about you. And so we're able to have these conversations with families, but we definitely, we hit it during the orientation process and through our newsletters too.
Yeah, I think the orientation is a huge, if you're parent orientation, or at least information around that time period is great. Kind of coupled with some of the deadlines that students have around housing deposits or completing their orientation, and like kind of marrying that with some of the stuff that you might think parents need to best support their student along the way.
And I'm finding that families, they really want actionable items.
Yeah.
Tell them what they need to knock off that checklist in order to help make their students successful.
Yeah, that is, I 1,000% agree. They just don't want to, they want to make sure their student stays on track. And I think that's, a big part of why we're on this call, which is the whole nudge the nudgers. Parents are the ultimate nudgers. You don't want them doing the work for the students, but if they can nudge them along, it's great. Speaking of nudging along, I'm nudging along the slide right here. So number 4, fourth point, families see the ROI of college, but they need more help navigating financial aid. And when we looked at some of the data this year, Raquel, satisfaction with financial assistance received actually went up. This is good. I don't know if I'd put myself in this category if I was answering the survey, but 71% are satisfied, up from 66% in 2023, which is good. Satisfaction with tuition as a worthwhile investment in a student's future. I'd say relatively level. Maybe a little bit of an increase. This is always that return on investment, which I think parents have, in some cases, better perspective on than the students, because they've been out in the world and they know how much the cost is and how valuable it is as well. And then 81% of families said it was difficult to pay for college, which is really high. And it showed a 5% increase from last year as well. So there's recognition of the value of education, but there's also even more recognition that it's really expensive. Looking a little bit more at this, thinking about the opinion of parents on the quality of information received from the financial aid office. Whenever I'm explaining to people what it is Campus ESP does or what I do, I always start with financial aid and the role that parents play. And so when you see this chart, it's a little bit tough to kind of absorb, but this is the good part of the chart, which is about 32% say that financial aid information, it's complete, useful, and easy to comprehend, no questions. The other components here, and you can see how it compares from 2023 to 2024, is it's fairly complete, or it's very confusing, or I don't recall receiving any of the information. But at the end of the day, it's about 2/3 of families could use a little bit more support when it comes to financial aid. And I think that's one of those areas that is also very emotional for families too, not only in college selection, but making sure their students are able to attend and graduate. So let's drill into this. Let's talk a little bit about this. Raquel, I think some of this news is actually pretty good, I think, with aid packages and some of the stuff that's going on here. But talk a little bit more about the timing of this survey, because we had a pretty unique event happen this year called FAFSA. And I'm sure it is everybody's favorite topic to talk about. But how do you expect take us through again the timing of when this data was collected, and how you think maybe it shaded or influenced some of these results, and then also what you expect for the results to be next year, assuming we don't have another FAFSA fiasco, which I always see like the hashtag for.
So this survey took place in October and November of 2023.
We were still optimistic at that point.
Yes, exactly. Jenny's smiling. I think we didn't know what the mess we were walking into was yet. So I think we're going to see the results of the FAFSA fiasco taint the prospective engagement study more than this one, because that happened. It should have happened in February and March, but a lot of the institutions decided they were going to wait and they wanted to launch their survey because they thought everything was going to be better in April and May. So we waited, and that's when most of the institutions had the surveys running. And I think we're going to see the effects of that issue play into that study a little more than on this.
So sorry to jump in this, for the prospective families, which is coming out, I think in like a couple months. I know it's before NACAC, so it'll be interesting to see. This is pre-FAFSA, and then the next study is going to be post-FAFSA, and that'll be a really interesting comparison point there.
Yeah, and what can we expect for this study if we do it again in the fall for the current families? I have no idea. I think that's one of the big issues that we're going to have, that we just don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting. I usually, and you know me very well, I usually have an opinion about everything, but in this case, I just don't know what to expect. And I think families are going to be pretty frazzled. That's what I think. But how are they going to respond to this question? Your guess.
All right. Well, let me ask Jen. And before I do, if you have questions about the data, about any aspect of the data, we're getting to this fourth and final bullet here. I have a couple other data points I want to share, but then we'll just open it up to questions. But Jen, let's talk about the FAFSA and how it impacted or didn't impact you this year. And, you know, so much about the FAFSA is around incoming enrollment. We always hear it from the enrollment side. I feel like that's a really big focus, but it can also obviously impact student retention. So from your perspective, where you sit, especially knowing how you are focused on student success and the role that parents play, what do you think the FAFSA impact will be this year for currently enrolled students?
Yeah, that is the big question. As we're talking about incoming students, of course, like every institution, we're watching summer melt. But when we think about our current students, a lot of the tools and the resources that we had in play to support students through the FAFSA process, to know what students have completed them, which ones do we need to nudge or, walk down to the financial aid office, we just didn't have that information. And so as we were doing outreach to students and students saying, yes, I completed it, or I'm waiting for one part, there was no way to really double check that and to do some intensive and intentional follow-up like we usually do. So we're still waiting to see how it all shakes out, because we still have information coming in and we're still getting packages together. So I'm guessing it will have an impact. I think at this point, we're trying to figure out how big that impact is actually going to be.
Have you actually had students coming in and just saying they're completely confused, or like, do you know of like, is it more hand holding, or have you seen things also work as far as communications that you've sent out?
So we always do, I will say, a little bit of hand holding along the way. We live in the state of Indiana, so we have different groups and partners that we're able to bring in and host FAFSA parties to help students through the process from the state. So that was really helpful, but it's that concern when there's one student that you're not able to connect with. And that's where I think the worry is right now.
Yeah. All right. So a couple of things. Oh, this slide build is weird. I apologize for that. So if you want to learn more, there's a couple of resources here. I'll say first off, the Campus ESP Learning Series. You'll see the link here. We have webinars, I think, almost every week at this point. So if there's an area that interests you, it's free to attend. You can be a Campus ESP customer. I think in most cases, we'll relate it back to how you use the product. But even if there's a topic that interests you and you're not a Campus ESP customer, it is free to attend. Definitely take advantage of those resources. And then we also have our annual customer summit every year. We actually had it in Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago. I feel like I'm still getting over all the activities we had from that. Next year, it's going to be back in Philadelphia. We're just going to keep it in Philly. Philly seemed like an easy place for a lot of schools to get to. It is actually May 21st. So if you're interested, maybe bookmark that date on your calendar. And then also, if you have questions about how we can help, you can always ask us for a demo. And then one other data point I wanted to share here, and then there's a couple of questions I want to get to in the chat. But wow, August is your opportunity to set parent expectations. This is not from the research. This is from Campus ESP. Don't worry what a monthly active user is. Don't worry about technical terms. Just know that activity for parents is highest in August. That is in 2 months. And that's because those first year families are coming on board. And it's also because, and in many cases, those prospective families are starting to really look at what schools their student might attend. But August is your opportunity. If you're going to make an investment or switch things up, August is always the great time to do it. And we also have some other charts here. Again, I wouldn't worry about too much about the details, but amount of commenting by parents is highest in August. Number of clicks is highest in August, except this past year, December was high because of the FAFSA. But generally, August is the place to like really say, okay, what are we doing this year? Maybe you can, spend a day or two whiteboarding. What's your content strategy? What's the information we need to get out to families? Again, from this research this year, mental health, financial aid, those are two areas of opportunity, I think, that you can really differentiate your institution if you get some partners and really focus on the content to help families. So we're going to take a little bit of Q&A here, but first, before we do, I just want to, again, thank my panel, Raquel and Jen. You guys were amazing. This is always, like I said, this is so great because there is not much data out there on current family engagement. I remember, I think there was data from George Koo back in the day, and he actually became one of our founding advisory board members, and it was always great to have his perspective. But there's just not a lot of data out there. So Raquel, number one, thank you for pulling together this data. It is a lot. You actually create reports for all the different schools too, right?
Yes, yeah. I was going to say, if anyone is listening here and they want to participate next year, it's free. They don't have to be a Campus DSP client. They don't have to be an RNL client. They participate and then they get their own summary, so they can look at their own data, which is pretty cool.
It's definitely like, why would you not do it? Right? I mean, are you just like, why would you not do it?
Yes.
All right, well, there, we settled that. So just make sure you email Raquel and she'll get you set up with all the details there. And then Jen as well, thank you so much. I know things are so busy at Marian, and I really appreciate your background. Any final points you want to make before I hit some questions here? And again, feel free to add them to the chat or to the Q&A. But Jen, any other like big takeaways when you just kind of step back and look at the research that's out this year?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I think as I take a step back and really look at it, it is truly understanding the impact of family engagement. We know family engagement offices have been around for years, right? 30, 40, 50 years. And so now, though, it feels like a new time in our society with the role of family members, the role that they play in a college student life, as these are emerging adults and the support that they need. These are key players in our student success. And so we have to find creative ways to support them.
Yeah, I completely agree. Even more so now that I am one of my own customers.
Welcome to the club.
There we go. Make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter. I got lots of interesting stories to tell coming up here. So we have a couple more questions. What are some other good ways to engage with family members outside of email and text? Are things like parent supporter specific events effective as well? This comment is almost right on cue, because if you go into the research, there is a section on events, and I removed it from this presentation because I was like, well, we'll focus on these other areas. So parent-specific events. I don't know, Jen, do you have things that you do at Marian, or what are some other ways to engage with parents and family members?
So, there are definitely your key events, right? For your donors, also family weekend. My piece of advice would be figure out exactly what your family members need. We have increased our number of Latino students, and so we have created events just for our Latino families that are completely in Spanish. We're also seeing a lot of grandparents starting to show up on campus. A lot of grandparents have made their way to orientation this year. And so as we head into the fall, we're figuring out, okay, what is something that we can do to honor these special people in our students' lives who are going to be part of their college experience. So I would say, take a look around, see what your students are saying, see who's already starting to pop up at events, and then kind of have some fun planning from there.
That is super helpful. Raquel, do we have a grandparent engagement survey coming out? Because I do feel like I actually have heard that coming up a lot. Actually, I hear it more in the context of parent fundraising. Not really what we're talking about here, but that connection between the school and the parent or grandparent is big. Are there other ways that you've seen schools, all the schools that you've talked to, engage outside of email and text that you think has worked?
You're asking me?
Yeah, Raquel.
I think virtual events have been something that has been very welcomed by families, especially when you're talking about families that live far away, out of state. or families that have schedules that just don't allow them to take you know, a day off from work to get in the car and travel to participate in something. Parents actually can write comments on the survey, and there was a question where we asked them if they had visited campus and what was the occasion, and then we asked them, do you want to tell us anything else about your experience on campus? And that always is a little bit dangerous, but also very interesting. And some of them spoke very highly of their experiences on campus and their experience attending virtual events where the institution had a speaker that was speaking about mental health and how parents can help students and other different issues. So I thought that was very interesting, because I think goes back to meeting families where they are, and maybe even asking families, what are the topics you're interested in learning more? As a parent or someone who supports a college student, what do you want to know more about? Do you want to talk about mental health? Should we be talking about red flags? What should we be looking for when we have a student who's been very communicative and suddenly it stops talking to the family so much? Things like that were the things families were mentioning as this was something so good.
Sorry.
No,
Another question that came in that is related to something I was just going to say, which is if you're going to plan an event, I mean, orientation, that's like a no-brainer, right? At this point, I would say most, I won't say most, but there's an increasing number of schools that have parent orientation, and that can be a virtual event. In many ways, it's probably better as a virtual event. But the question that just came in is, how do you plan orientation when parents and students are present? Do you have activities for parents only and separate them in groups? Jen, I see you shaking your head there. What do you guys do to facilitate that?
Yeah, so we do it at different times throughout the day. So right now we are running 2-day orientations. First day, families and students are together, but we look for opportunities in the schedule when we can pull them apart. And so we might send the students out with their orientation leader where they're just getting to know each other a little bit more. And we bring in the director of our counseling center to talk about this transition that our students are about ready to experience going from high school to college. And so our counseling center is actively involved. We're talking about mental health. We're talking about those red flags, but we're talking about what this experience truly is going to be and what to expect. And then we'll bring them all back together for a session on financial aid and paying your bills and tuition. And then we'll go through the day, and a little bit later, we're going to separate them. We're going to send the students out to focus on their transition with the orientation leaders and some guest speakers. And then we do a parent panel, because we know family members have questions, and sometimes they're more comfortable asking questions when their student is not present. And so we spend some time with the families talking about, this is what this is really going to be. This is when you should bring your student home for the weekend. This is the time you should leave them on campus. This is when we want to invite you back. So we really try to set expectations with our families and provide them with as much information as we can to help ensure that success.
Thank you. I'm gonna wrap it up because we're running out of time. But one of the comments that just came through as you were saying that, Jen, was, will we have access to the recording? Yes, you will definitely have access to the recording. I have to go lead a parent panel right now, so thanks for all the data. And I do think the parent panel is great because parents, they're nervous. And seeing a familiar face, somebody's gone through it, especially if it is a parent of a first-generation student or whatever segment of families you're trying to reach, if they can put it in their own words and take parents through their journey, I think that really have a dramatic impact. And then final question is there a fee for the demo? Of course, there's no fee for the demo. So if you are interested in a demo of Campus CSP, we'd love to do that. We also have oftentimes where there's a kind of group demos. In fact, I have a group demo coming up in another half an hour where we'll just get a bunch of schools together and just take them through the platform. But I will say all this data is hopefully going to help you decide how much you want to invest in parent engagement and make sure it's focused on student success, because whether it's Campus CSP or whether it's MailChimp, or even if you're trying to figure it out on Facebook, I think there's a big reason to engage with parents and families. You're seeing how involved these families are with their students, but also what their expectations are of you. And parents can help. So with that, Jen, Raquel, thank you so much again. It was really fun. I really enjoy these presentations, and hope everybody, what's today? Today's Thursday? I don't even know anymore. Thank you everybody for spending time with us today, and have a great rest of your week, and keep an eye out for the prospective parent engagement report coming out in in a few weeks, maybe a month or so. So thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.